you good afternoon, and welcome to Loyola University of Chicago, at least in a virtual sense. My name is Michael Murphy, and it's my great honor to serve as director of the Hank Center. Even in challenging days, especially in challenging days, we give gratitude again to God for the opportunity to listen and dialogue, teach and learn, so that we may direct our gifts towards the cultivation and construction of a more loving, just, and sustainable world. It is in this spirit that I greet you, and on behalf of the leadership at Loyola University of Chicago and the Hank family, whose generous endowment supports our many endeavors, and on behalf of Commonweal Magazine, who are also co-sponsoring this lecture, welcome to our 2020 Teilhard de Chardin SJ Lecture with this year's visiting fellow, Stephen P. Millies. A kind welcome also from our dedicated center staff, Center Manager Megan Toomey, Graduate Student Assistant Kathleen McNutt, and our two undergraduate assistants, Catherine and Francis. They are most instrumental all in getting our events from farm to table, and I remain very grateful for their consistently superb work. So thanks again. The Teilhard Fellowship in Catholic Study, named for the great Jesuit geologist, paleontologist, and mystic, and yes, when do we ever hear those three words in the same sentence? It's Teilhard de Chardin. It's a visiting fellowship each fall semester. We invite scholars from across the disciplines and from around the world whose work intersects with the rich intellectual, artistic, and historical tradition of Roman Catholic thought and practice. We invite these fellows to come and teach a course, give workshops, and a formal lecture. This year, we just had to go across town to get Stephen P. Millies, and it's so great. The fellowship is funded in part by a generous gift from Loyola University's Jesuit community and also the Office of the President. The chair is open to both lay men and women in rotation with Jesuit scholars whenever possible, and scholars, men and women both, from other religious orders as well. I can't tell you what a delight it's been to have Steve with us this fall. You know, even with the hard realities of COVID and being so uniquely sequestered, Steve and I have had many life-giving conversations and a whole bunch of laughter, oddly. He is simply a joy to be around, but don't take my word for it. Ask his students. I've heard over and over how much students are enjoying his course, Catholicism and Political Engagement. And it's Catholic Studies kids, and it's also other students. I've heard maybe 5 people have written me, and that really means a lot. It doesn't happen very often that way. How refreshing, they say, and life-giving his approach to everybody's 2 favorite topics, religion and politics. He's educated them and he's inspired them. And I dare say it's been a 2-way street, because Steve is texting me, it seems like 1 week after the next, that this was the best undergraduate class he's taught ever. So Steve, thanks very much. And thanks for teaching your students and our students well. Thank you also, Steve, in advance for what promises to be an edifying experience and a lecture, your lecture that you've titled so provocatively, The Gift of Our People, a fresh look at our faithful citizenship in a foreboding moment. So, we're going to get to that and settle in and listen to your remarks, but just a little housekeeping before I formally introduce Steve and we begin. So please be our guest for 2 upcoming Zoom opportunities. All Saints Day is on this Sunday, as you know, and we'll have a true saint among us, Father John O'Malley, perhaps the greatest historian living, the great Jesuit from Georgetown, giving a talk called Venerating the Saints, an Ancient Tradition Alive Today. This event is hosted by the Lumen Christi Institute, the Bollandist Society, and American Media. It's co-sponsored by the Hank Center and a host of others. On Thursday, November 5th, which is just 1 week from today and 2 days after the election, I know you all know, our fall series concludes with the Catholic Vote 2020, the third in our series. This one's called Results, Reflection, Renewal. We're not sure if the votes will be counted by that point, but know this, we'll have a great panel to help us navigate all that's transpired in the previous 2 days and indeed this election season. So now, finally, just some remarks about today. This afternoon Zoom is a webinar, but it's in a meeting space. So you'll know that if you're a Zoom person. The chat, though, is disabled. But we want you to ask questions and make comments. If you want to do so, you'll use the chat feature, but you'll direct them right to me, Michael Murphy. You'll select my name and type it in there. Megan will be helping me a bit, but I'll be collating, and then I'll give some questions afterwards to Steve. We know it's really more about Steve's lecture and just a little dialogue afterwards, maybe 20 minutes. So with that, we can settle in. Steve will speak for about 45, 50 minutes, and then afterwards we can kind of engage him with your help in good conversation. So then, let us introduce formally our Teilhard de Chardin Fellow in Catholic Studies, Professor Stephen P. Millies. Professor Millies' scholarship explores the Catholic Church's relationship to politics in a perspective that embraces history, theology, law, ethics, sociology, philosophy, and political theory. Steve studied political theory at the Catholic University of America, completing his degree with a study of religion in British statesman Edmund Burke's political ideas. Before coming to CTU and becoming the Bernardin director, he was associate professor of political science at the University of South Carolina, Aiken, where he held the J. Strom Thurmond Endowed Chair in Political Science. Steve did his undergrad work at a little university on the lake called Loyola University of Chicago, and it's so great to have him back. Steve is a member of several learned societies, including the Association for Political Theory, the Catholic Theological Society of America, the Society of Christian Ethics. As well, he participates in the International Thomas Merton Society, the Eric Voegelin Society, and he is the secretary for the Edmund Burke Society of America. His book, Joseph Bernardin, Seeking Common Ground, from Liturgical Press, 2016, won first place in the biography category for the Catholic Press Association's 2017 Book Awards. And he has contributed to several periodicals and journals that include America, Commonweal, the National Catholic Reporter, and U.S. Catholic. I'll add also, Steve, the op-ed you wrote for the Tribune a couple of days ago was first class. Finally, his most recent book is right here. It's called Good Intentions, and it's a history of Catholic voters. Sorry, a history of Catholic voters road. Yeah, sorry, I misread that. A history of Catholic voters road from Roe to Trump, right? Couldn't be more timely, and it's a very good book. This is from Liturgical Press 2018. So thank you very much for listening to this introduction, and let us give a warm spiritual welcome to Steve. And Steve, the Zoom stage is yours.
Thanks so much, Mike. Let me begin just with a couple of personal notes. You can hear me okay? Everything good? So yeah, as Mike mentioned, 30 fall semesters ago, I began as an undergraduate student at a little university on the lake called Loyola. And I want to say it's been a peculiar honor to be able to be back virtually this semester, but to be a part of the Loyola community and the Loyola ecosystem in a way that I haven't been in a long time. I keep joking that it's a strange visiting fellowship when I haven't even visited Loyola yet, but it's the way it goes in these times. But I do want to say that there are a lot of people who are in my thoughts as I stand here to do this today. There are professors that I had at Loyola who really made it possible to get underway to where we all are here today. I want to name some of them. Certainly Claudio Katz, just retired from Loyola, in whose classroom 30 years ago I began thinking about political theory as a vocation. But I also need to name Ted Karamansky, Bob Buchholz, Ray Tatalovich, Father Bob Byerly, Dr. Pauline Viviano, Tom Engemann, and Zuhair Ghazal, who's still in the history department, with whom I shared many lunches talking about the academic vocation and other stuff. So many wonderful people at Loyola, and today too. And in a particular way, I want to thank Peter Schrader, and I want to thank Alex Grigrescu for the way that the Department of Political Science has welcomed me as a colleague for this semester that I'm back at Loyola. But I'd be remiss if I didn't thank some folks back at my home institution, Catholic Theological Union in Hyde Park too. My good friend and our now retiring president, Mark Francis, our dean, Dick Benson, who agreed to share me with Loyola this semester, but also our vice president for development, Colleen Kennedy, who has helped publicize this event, and others. And I'll mention our vice president for finance and operation, Kevin Doherty, too, because the leadership at CTU is very collegial and all of those decisions really get made together. As Mike mentioned, I really do want to say a quick word about the students that I have this semester at Loyola. What he says is true. It is the best roomful of undergraduates that I've had the pleasure to be with as a group for a few reasons. First of all, they've brought their A game. Our conversations are great every Tuesday night. But the other thing I really have to affirm is that from sea to shining sea, in tiny little boxes on our screen this semester, they've built a community. And it's really wonderful to be together with them, even if they think Tom Hanks appeared in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. We did have to straighten them out on that. I don't want people to report that wrong information is being taught at Loyola. But all that aside, I really do finally want to thank the Hanks Center. I want to thank Megan and Kathleen, but I certainly want to thank my good friend, Mike Murphy. As a director of the Bernardin Center at CTU, I can say something about being the director of something like the Hanks Center. To play that role, a person really sort of has to be about a third scholar, a third impresario, and a third janitor. I see Mike laughing. He knows what I'm talking about. And I want to really affirm how lucky Loyola is to have somebody who fires on all cylinders in this role. Mike has mentioned the joy of conversation that we've had during this semester, and it's gone two ways, and I look forward to it continuing. I thank you, my friend, for this wonderful opportunity, and for everything else, hail to you, Loyola. And let me begin by confiding something in you, if you'll permit me to, something private, secret, scandalous even. Almost 4 years ago, while I was writing Good Intentions, my book about why so many Catholics supported Donald Trump and how Catholic outrage about the Roe decision has driven so much of the political polarization and partisanship that defines our time, I wrote a key passage very carefully because I expected it to explode like a hand grenade when some readers saw it. I've been disappointed ever since because the grenade never went off. So I'm going to pull the pin here this afternoon myself. I should be honest enough to acknowledge that maybe the reason why I have to engage in this light and whimsical auto-da-fe with you here today is because no one read my book, or at least read it carefully. I won't ask for a show of hands, but I will assure you that you'll find these sentences at page 103, and read along with me if you have your copy handy. Quote, "Perhaps the Roe decision, while not entirely good, is not entirely evil either. Although the taking of any born or unborn life always is evil, perhaps even the Roe decision can be a sign of how the political system and the legal system are taking the rights of women in particular and persons more generally, ever more seriously amid what are, in general, tremendously complex political and legal circumstances in which the moral stakes could not be higher. We can decide to take the Roe decision as an opportunity for division, to struggle in a battle against a foe, or we can choose to take Roe and everything else in modern life as an opportunity for dialogue, to find and build on what is good while we recognize where the voice of the Christian moral perspective is needed. If you're beginning to sense where the controversy could be found there in my clarion call for Catholics to embrace the good we can find in Roe versus Wade, permit me then just to press on a little further. Also at page 103, ultimately, this is a question of faith. Do we believe in a possibility that the gospel could become lost? Can the world, once entered by the Word made flesh, truly become post-Christian? It could be that the challenge of an apparently post-Christian age is not to recapture a lost past or to reenact whatever we think a Christian age was, but rather to imagine how the Christian revelation is found and experienced differently in a new time. I suppose I might even go beyond the text of good intentions and ask, in the spirit of comments you'll remember that President Trump made, whether we really believe that Joe Biden or any Democrat ever could possibly hurt God. And that's where I want to begin here. Even now, when mass attendance and church participation have declined at alarming rates, and while the church is beset by self-inflicted scandals of the worst sorts, even in this secular age, the idea that this is a post-Christian period of history must be nonsense, simple and pure baloney for any of us who believe that the incarnation took place. The world, created by the Word, consecrated by the Word made flesh, and inspired by the Spirit of the living Word, cannot be abandoned by God. It is not possible. What only is possible is that all of the certainty of power and hegemony, of worldly influence, can slip from our grasps. We can become a church of the catacombs once more, but if we do, that's our fault. And not in an exclusive way, but certainly in an indicative way and in a particular way, I want to name the failure to embrace what's good in Roe as the critical moment where our influence and our relevance began to slip away. I say that because in 30 years of talking to people who hold all sorts of different opinions about abortion, I've never encountered one who believes abortion itself is a good thing. Not one. I don't mean to say such people don't exist. I mean rather to say they're quite rare. Yet our rhetoric and the way we devolve rapidly to calling someone pro-abortion suggests the deep problem that's at work. Last year, America Magazine's Michael O'Loughlin produced a podcast series about the Catholic Church and the AIDS crisis of the 1980s. One of the Sisters of Charity he interviewed, Sister Carol Heffelstein, who'd worked at the AIDS clinic at St. Vincent's Hospital, described a seemingly strange reaction she had when gay rights protesters came to the hospital and, among other things, adorned the arms of the resurrected Christ with condoms. St. Vincent's, you may know, was a refuge from the AIDS crisis. Nowhere else in those days offered as much care as the Sisters of Charity and the medical staff. Sister Karen wondered, why here of all places? But her reaction wasn't angry. She was asking, what else do they need from us that we're not offering them? And she and the sisters set out to find what they were missing. They changed hospital rules to permit non-family members to visit sick loved ones, a particular problem for the gay community of the 1980s. And they gave sensitivity training to hospital staff so that people visiting sick friends and loved ones wouldn't encounter so many microaggressions during their time at St. Vincent's. The Sisters of Charity and St. Vincent's Hospital set out to meet people where they were and simply to be present, to minister to them. That is the response of faith to a world that's confusing and unfamiliar. We respond in love, even when we feel a little baffled. And that is what we've failed to do in so much of the public debate. When I think of the most enthusiastic supporters of abortion rights I've ever talked with, what finally I hear them saying loudest is they want women to feel they have the same control over their own lives that men always have had, and actually to have that control no matter what choice they make. More still, they want women to be recognized as having that control, that sort of agency. And as a general principle, I can think of nothing in the Catholic faith which says that we should disagree. In fact, I can think of many reasons as a Catholic why I should agree. Yet, when we talk about Roe and abortion, which notice again, I'm being careful to go on saying I recognize as a grave moral evil, when we talk about abortion, there's no room for an acknowledgement of what I think most abortion rights supporters want more than abortions. They want an affirmation of who women are as human persons. They want us to ask Sister Karen's question. What else do they need from us that we're not offering them? And seeing us as a community of believers in a gospel of love, maybe they're a little shocked and scandalized that we are so unable to do that. maybe we look like hypocrites. Maybe we are hypocrites. Maybe. It's especially fitting that I should offer these reflections in the context of a lecture named for Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Pierre Teilhard was a paleontologist, as Mike mentioned, who saw creation through the evidence of evolution he had dug from the earth with his own hands, reasoned over in the light of his scientific training with the intelligence given to him by his creator. Women and men increasingly knew that creation was billions of years old in Teilhard's time, not just a few thousand, as scripture tells us. The inconsistency more and more was a stumbling block for believers, and Pierre Teilhard asked Sister Karen's question in his own way when he set about to explain the phenomenon of man, the cosmic Christ, and why everything that rises must converge. We know the story. Teilhard was silenced. Today we know he was right. So there's danger in that question, Sister Karen asked. But our beginning point here is to affirm that she asked the right question. She asked the question that will guide us. The world is not here for the church. The church is here for the world. With that in mind, let's survey the Catholic engagement with American politics and American cultural life today as we ask, what else do they need from us that we're not offering them? To begin that survey, I think we need to deal with the implications of a paradox and a problem. The paradox is this: Catholics today are at the peak of our cultural, social, and political influence in American life, while all around us and in every direction the church is in retreat. We know the facts and the data, I think. The Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate reports a decline in weekly Mass attendance since 1970 from 55% of Catholics to 21% of Catholics in 2019, and there are other data points too. But I don't want to get lost in data trying to verify something I think generally is known and well understood. I should say too that the phenomenon is complex. Stephen Bullivant has noted in his recent book, Mass Exodus, there are several factors, internal to the church and external ones too. And the strong likelihood is that American Catholicism would have had a fairly torrid time of the past half century, even without the liturgical and doctrinal developments since the Second Vatican Council. Yet even while all that is true, a former Catholic vice president is the Democratic nominee. 3 speakers of the House in succession since 2007 have been Catholic. The Senate Minority Leader is a Catholic. 2/3 of the Supreme Court is a Catholic. 17 state governors are Catholics. This is the paradox. And unsurprisingly, the paradox produces some cognitive dissonance. That's the problem. To hear some Catholic leaders tell the tale, we are living today in a fervid outbreak of vicious anti-Catholicism. My colleague and good friend from St. Louis University, Bill McCormick, recently wrote about this for America. McCormick gave the topic in all its historical and sociological complexity a good treatment. I think he gets it right when he says the argument over anti-Catholicism between Catholics becomes yet another proxy war for the bitter conflict over how Catholics ought to engage American culture. In other words, claims asserting anti-Catholic bias have joined our political fray. They're weapons deployed in the culture war. It's part of the trap set for the Biden campaign with the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett. Donald Trump, who, let's all remember, said in his 2016 campaign that we have a problem in this country, it's called Muslims. That same Donald Trump lamented last month when he nominated Judge Barrett how Democrats are going after Judge Barrett's Catholicism and are, quote, basically fighting a major religion in this country. This is Donald Trump, be reminded, who called Pope Francis a disgrace. This is Donald Trump, whose White House staff and campaign surrogates call Joe Biden a Catholic in name only, and who then rather high-mindedly wonder why the Biden campaign is silent about anti-Catholic bias. I think all these details are important because they highlight for us what really seems to be going on here. We have a partisan division in our church about how to be Catholic out in public. It is a partisan division. the question that governs a lot of our Catholic engagement with political life generally turns out to be asking what a good Catholic should do. How should a good Catholic vote? But our measure of a good Catholic is intertwined with our political convictions rather than our shared belief in the gospel. There's a theological disagreement here that's wrapped around a political disagreement. And things have gotten so that they're not easy to separate. It reminds me of the way that some Republicans began calling other Republicans Republicans in name only back in the 1990s. Or think of all the political commercials we've seen for the last 30 years, affirming that one candidate is the real conservative and the other is not. Think of how that energy led to a Tea Party in 2010 to nearly break off from the Republican Party, and then think of how that energy coalesced around Donald Trump in 2016 to transform the Republican Party. Or think of the same way we hear suggestions that Catholics who vote for Joe Biden or for any Democrat are not real Catholics. These sorts of suggestions have been made in widely circulated homilies given by Wisconsin Father James Altman and Maryland Father Ed Meeks. The Bishop of Tyler, Texas, has tweeted his support for Father Meeks, and both Spokane Bishop Thomas Daly and retired Philadelphia Archbishop Charles Chaput publicly disagreed with San Diego Bishop Robert McElroy when McElroy, the only political scientist among American bishops, McElroy described how Catholics might vote for any candidate who seems best to them because the formulation of laws and public policy, the working of government, is complex, not a simple for it or against it proposition. I think that how our differences inside the church resemble our political differences outside the church is not a coincidence. I think there's a sort of partially unorchestrated, but partially orchestrated politicization at work in our Catholic engagement with American politics. And maybe the most important thing we should note about it is that it began a long time ago from good intentions, an impulse we really should praise and agree with no matter what our politics. Really, this began with the Second Vatican Council and Vatican II's desire for lay Catholic women and men to embrace their role in the world as believers and citizens. The trouble began in the second chapter of the Council's Pastoral Constitution on the Church in the Modern World, Gaudium et Spes. The Council Fathers had labored over this particular portion of the text because it was the most unusual text produced by the Council. An ecumenical council never had addressed itself so directly to the world outside the church before, and in turn it meant the Council had to think carefully about the role that Catholics should play in the world outside the church. Speaking at the council, Bishop Francois Marty, a French bishop from Rennes, called attention to how the church no longer controls the world as it did in the medieval West. He went on, now it should act rather as a leaven in the world, becoming incarnate in cultures that are very diverse. These thoughts gave birth to the text of Gaudium et Spes, which says in part, the will to play one's role in common endeavors should be everywhere encouraged. Praise is due to those national procedures which allow the largest possible number of citizens to participate in public affairs with genuine freedom. And it goes on. Thus, the church serves as a leaven and a kind of soul for human society, as society is to be renewed in Christ and transformed into God's family. Pursuing the saving purpose which is proper to her, the church does not only communicate divine life to the world, but in some way casts the reflected light of that life over the entire earth by the way in which it strengthens the seams of human society and imbues the everyday activity of life with a deeper meaning and importance. This is a blueprint for social and political action. More than that, it virtually comes as a command to change the world through social engagement and political life. And indeed, we believe this so well that each Mass is concluded with a reminder, go in peace, glorifying the Lord by your life. This is a good fruit of the council, but there's been an unintended consequence. The desire to play an active role as Catholics in political life somehow led church leaders to begin behaving like an interest group. Lobbyists mobilizing their members to pressure elected officials to achieve policy outcomes. Maybe it was an unfortunate consequence of establishing the US Bishops' Conference in Washington, D.C. They were too close to the culture of interest group behavior and lobbying. Whatever the reason, an invigorated bishops' conference in the early 1970s after the Second Vatican Council intersected with the Supreme Court's Roe versus Wade decision in 1973. You know the rest. Even today, we Catholics in the pews are not really encouraged, each of us, to behave like a leaven or like an individual light of the world. Instead, we get instructions in homilies or in faithful citizenship statements. Abortion is the preeminent priority, our bishops have told us. We're told to pray and study, but too often we know what the outcome is supposed to be. Pope Francis has said, in the spirit of Gaudium et Spes, that it's the job of the church to form consciences, not replace them. Of course, he only needed to remind us about that because a church bent on using the power of the Catholic vote to achieve an outcome has spent so many years replacing consciences instead of forming them. This strategy for injecting our Catholic perspective into the affairs of the world has not really reflected a desire to encourage us to a deeper commitment to prayer and study, or to persuade our fellow citizens, even perhaps to win a few souls to the church. We know what the goal has been. We must apply pressure to end abortions. Alone, this wasn't enough. We should note something else happened next. Pope John Paul II was elected Bishop of Rome in 1978. He brought with him a tendency to speak less of the engagement with culture as a leavening or in terms of encounter and accompaniment. Instead, Pope John Paul was apt to use words like struggle, battle, and onslaught. John Paul's biographer, George Weigel, explained it this way, quote, "The confrontation between the church and Poland's communist masters was a constant war, not a sporadic set of skirmishes. It was always," Weigel wrote, "we and they, us and them." Weigel concludes, this was a non-adjudicable struggle. Somebody was going to win and somebody was going to lose. The tendency to see the world in these zero-sum terms of opposing sides came to characterize much of the whole church during a papacy that lasted longer than a quarter century. How could John Paul not be so influential? At least here in the United States, this pattern of binary thinking became imprinted on the church by means of the selection of bishops. The story is well known about the shift that took place in the 1980s as bishops were named to the United States who preferred confrontation and embraced with John Paul II the gospel's encouragement to be a sign of contradiction. The call, by the way, repeated in the council's dogmatic constitution, Lumen Gentium. Bishops like Boston's Cardinal Bernard Law rose in favor, while the influence of Chicago's more reconciling Cardinal Joseph Bernardin began to wane. Slowly, at first, but quite quickly since the 2004 election, when George W. Bush complained in a meeting at the Vatican, "Not all the bishops are with me," Catholicism began to be presented publicly as one unvaried, monolithic social group, where good Catholics believe in prescribed ways that invariably focus on abortion politics. Later, marriage and religious freedom joined abortion as talismans of a particular sort of political expression of Catholicism out in public. And of course, this presentation of a monolithic church that must present itself to the world in perfect agreement about non-negotiable political positions is false. This isn't what the church is like at all. We know from data collected by the Pew Research Center that Catholics divide by political party about the same as the whole population. And we know that Catholic Republicans look like Republicans and Catholic Democrats look like Democrats when we look at them on the issues. And there's even more diversity in the church than that. We know it from experience. We have ethnic diversity, racial diversity, economic diversity, educational diversity, and all other sorts too. In fact, as you may know, there are 22 other rites in communion with Rome alongside the more familiar Latin rite that we all know. Catholicism is a dizzyingly varied community, as it should be. That's what it means to be a universal church. There is a universality in our church that is sort of centralized or hierarchical, the way we all profess one creed and believe in one gospel. But the public presentation of Catholicism has tended in recent decades to overstate that more vertical, hierarchical axis of universality. We've lost sight of the other sort of universality, the one that embraces Egyptian Copts and Ecuadorian abuelitas, plumbers and professors, sinners and saints, Franciscans and Jesuits, Republicans and Democrats, a church that opens its arms to embrace the whole world. Overlooking that inclusive dimension of our universality, we Catholics have helped to cultivate the polarization that's all around us today. The polarization that's been so destructive both to our politics and now we find to the unity of the church. There are many causes, many reasons why it's happened. But I think the original sin here is the one I mentioned a little while ago. We took the Second Vatican Council's call to embrace political action as a call to imitate interest groups and lobbyists. We've been given as clear an idea of how we are supposed to vote as Catholics as if we were members of Greenpeace or the NRA. And it bears saying loud and clear, Catholicism is not a political interest. Catholicism certainly means that Catholics must be interested in social and political questions. That comes with our faith. But as soon as that interest becomes a program, or as soon as we begin acting as though achieving public policy results is a measure of our Catholicity, that'll be the moment when we've traded the ongoing spiritual challenge of believing in the gospel and changing our own lives for a political creed that can't escape the gravitational pull of its earthbound horizon, if we haven't made that mistake already. So let's try to start over. Let's go back to the beginning, to first principles, to see whether we can imagine a different and a better way to do this, because now I think we can say honestly from every angle that what we're doing now doesn't work. Not only has this approach to political action produced perverse and undesirable outcomes like polarization and division, but it seems worth mentioning that approaching politics in this way for 11 presidential elections, and this will be the 12th, has not stopped one abortion yet. And even if the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett should lead to the reversal of Roe versus Wade, still, the world that children are born into is one with social and political institutions now so damaged in the name of overturning Roe that we really have to wonder whether it's been worth it. Our capacity to address every other problem, like COVID-19, has been compromised by the politicization of everything in the name of overturning Roe. And stop and ask yourselves this. Imagine once Roe is overturned. Do you think this is all just going to stop? I don't. I think we're going to continue with this polarization and division. So let's go back to the beginning. Let's recognize that the Second Vatican Council was dealing with a fundamentally new reality when it touched on the question of how Catholic citizens and voters should behave. Because no one was asking that question at the time of the Council of Trent, or in the time of Thomas Aquinas, or in the early church when Peter and Paul and others encouraged us to obey civil authorities. This sort of responsibility didn't exist then. It's new. We're still dealing with this reality as a new reality today. And we need to do this with an eye on the one bit of guidance that the council gave us. We need to be a leaven and a kind of a soul for human society. The Second Vatican Council told us Catholics should strengthen the seams of human society, not pull them apart. But how shall we do this? I have 4 suggestions that I want to offer that can point us down a different path from this beginning in Gaudium et Spes. But all 4 really amount to the same thing. In every dimension of our Christian lives, we know that we're meant to be a sort of a leaven and a light in our families, in our neighborhoods, in our workplaces. And I hope we know that we do that most effectively by living our example humbly, not by flexing our muscles, throwing our weight around, telling everyone else they're wrong and we're right. We succeed best when we encounter and accompany people where they are, when we preach the gospel at all times using words when necessary. My first suggestion is this: be practical about politics. That means we need to understand the issues and learn about how the political system really works. I think one of the reasons why so many people have been so susceptible to the polarization and division we've suffered is because we really don't have a good grip on those things, the issues, and how the political system really works. It's easy to talk about shortcuts that will solve a problem all at once if people don't widely understand that presidents can't stop abortions. But presidents do a lot of other things. They direct public health agencies. They command the military. They work with Congress to determine where our budget priorities are. Unless we're being practical enough to be thinking about those things in concert on a well-informed basis, we don't really have much ability to leaven or illuminate anything. What this really means is recovering the centrality of prudence in our political decision-making. It should seem a little odd to us that our most ancient teaching about politics, that it's a variety of practical wisdom, should have become so obscured by the desire for one policy outcome. But that's what's happened. We've neglected to be prudent for a long time, and the evidence tells us our imprudence has had consequences. Fixated on one outcome still unachieved after 11 presidential elections, still we chart the same direction into the 12th election, despite the polarization we've cultivated, despite the pandemic that's been mismanaged and its cost in lives. This is not what prudence looks like. We should be honest enough to say that and practical enough to do better. My second suggestion is this: we need to expand our Catholic and our political imaginations. We need to see beyond the division and remember there's something more fundamental about our Catholic faith than even ending abortions or even accompanying the poor. Remember the words of the Gospel of John, what sometimes is called the prayer of Jesus. I revealed your name to those whom you gave me out of the world, and as you sent me into the world, so I sent them to the world. I pray not only for them, but also for those who will believe in me through their word, so that they all may be one. Our Great Commission is not to win an election or achieve any public policy victory. As Christians, this goal of unity is far greater, much more important. If I should cure all illness, relieve all poverty, end all wars, stop all abortions, but do not have love, I am nothing. For this reason, we're called to dialogue, to encounter, to accompaniment. Themes Pope Francis sounds again and again to the consternation only of those who seem to prefer division. Our imaginations need to be bigger. We need to embrace the challenges, not flee from them, and even to ask, what good can we find in the Roe decision? Because something is there. And then it's a place to begin a conversation. And that is how we both accompany one another to build up the unity of the world and the church, and perhaps come nearer to the public policy outcomes we want, because we'll be more persuasive when we behave that way. My third suggestion is this: We need to remember Sister Karen's question. What do they need from us that we're not offering them? That's our political program. That's the right place to begin thinking about politics because it puts us where Sister Karen was thinking, as a minister performing service. That's what we are as citizens and voters, because that's what we are meant to be as Catholic believers. We don't put off that call to service when we embark on politics. In fact, in political and social relationships is where this call to service is most important, because actually the call to service would seem pretty silly if we didn't answer it in social relationships, in the places where we encounter other people. We need to resist the impulse to react with anger, even righteous anger, when we encounter something so provocative as the resurrected Jesus with condoms on his arms. We need to see beyond the provocation, to see what really is there, a signal about a relationship that needs our attention. I'd be remiss here if I didn't connect this to Pope Francis's encyclical Fratelli Tutti that reached us earlier this month. The second chapter of Fratelli Tutti focuses on the parable of the Good Samaritan, and Francis concludes, all of us have a responsibility for the wounded, those of our own people and all the peoples of the earth. Let us care for the needs of every man and woman, young and old, with the same fraternal spirit of care and closeness that marked the Good Samaritan. I think that's how we're supposed to vote, too. As Catholics, we don't belong to the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. We belong to the Samaritan Party. We are meant to respond prudently, with care for the wounded, those of our own people and all the peoples of the earth. If you want to know how a good Catholic should vote, that's the only answer I have. Finally, my fourth suggestion is this. We don't need to be afraid of making mistakes. If we're being practical about politics, then we know elections don't really ever resolve questions. We hear over and over, this is the most important election in our lifetime. Somehow, every election is the most important. And in one sense, every election is the most important because it's the one we're having right now. But if we're really being honest, we know that each election really just sets up the questions for the next one. As the Affordable Care Act has proved, victories aren't final, and there's almost no policy outcome that can't be undone. Politics is like life itself. It's restless, dynamic, always changing. And one comfort we can draw from that is that we can feel free to lower the stakes a little. This election matters. Choices will be made and they'll have consequences, but the moral universe will not collapse based on its outcome, not even this time. We'll vote again in 2022 and again in 2024. And I know it sounds a little optimistic in these days when the stakes feel like they're unusually high, when the prospect of even having our votes counted seems less certain than it should be. But maybe it's enough to say that even if the stakes are unusually high, we need to keep the perspective that it's unusual, and we shouldn't make a habit of it. We need to keep a sense of proportion. We're making a decision as a community about where the community will go next. Even a wrong turn is not the end of the road. We made wrong turns before. We'll choose again later. We'll find our way back, and the community will go on. I've gotten all the way to the end of this talk, and I haven't told you yet about why I've given this lecture the title I've given it, The Gift of the People. The phrase has had a number of occurrences in American Catholic history. The one I like best is the way John England, the first bishop of Charleston, South Carolina, used the phrase in 1841. England was a remarkable Catholic bishop. He arrived in the United States in 1820, 200 years ago, ordained in Ireland to become the first bishop of Charleston. So determined was he to prove that Catholics can be good American citizens that he wrote a constitution for his diocese. There was a representative assembly with priests in an upper house and lay people in a lower house. There were accountability mechanisms that required a bishop to investigate complaints against priests, and there was lay participation in the spending of church money. England offers as much of a potent reminder as actually a lot of Catholic history that there are many ways to be the Catholic Church. Bishop England's constitution for his own diocese expressed his conviction that in every situation, the power of the rulers is the gift of the people. My own view is that England believed, as I believe, that our participation in the church and our participation in American political life are so similar, we shouldn't bother to distinguish them. We should do both the same way. Let them inform one another. The power that a president enjoys is a gift of the people, just as every priest and bishop is given the gift of the people. The gift always is the reminder that all authority is exercised for the people, only because only the people matter. The people are the greatest good in any republic, and we Catholics believe this because we believe that the human person exists in and for community. In this sense, too, it is in this sense, too, that Pope Francis recalls Gaudium et Spes by telling us in Fratelli Tutti that we are so made that we cannot live, develop, and find fulfillment except in the sincere gift of self to others. And this is the heart of it. Pope Francis has called us throughout his ministry to a better kind of politics, one that recalls this message of Bishop England and later was echoed by Cardinal Bernardin. We are a gift to each other. Our hope lies in our community. We must see one another as gift, grace, given in community to one another. That's what the church is. That's what politics really is. 200 years ago, Bishop England foresaw that a free society convulsed by party spirit, the partisan divisions that snap asunder the bonds of our society, Bishop England saw those are the greatest threat that our free society faces. I think Bishop England hardly could have imagined how this partisan spirit also would threaten the unity of our church today. That's the cost of life in the church community and life in the political community being so similar. Yet we Roman Catholics have it in our faith, in our tradition, and in ourselves to bring healing to these divisions that we ourselves have caused. What is needed is a politics which is far-sighted and capable of a new, integral, and interdisciplinary approach to handling the different aspects of the crisis. In other words, a healthy politics that begins with each of us. That's what Pope Francis says. For us, perhaps it's enough for now just to recall Sister Karen and the Good Samaritan. There's no one so foreign, no one so unlike me, no one whose ideas are so distasteful to me that I shouldn't ask, what else do they need from us that we're not offering them? There's no stranger on the side of the road I shouldn't stop for. There's no relationship we must not tend to. I believe that the Catholic engagement with American politics will enter a new era after this election, no matter who wins. We've come to see too clearly now that what we've been doing doesn't work. No matter how good the intention to change the world by mobilizing Catholic voters was, it's time to try something new in a new moment because the results have been too destructive. What we need to remember is that we don't need a church to mobilize us. We need a church to inform our consciences, and then we have to mobilize ourselves. We have to change our own lives to conform them to the gospel. And then we need to bring that change to the world, each of us. Even once we do that, we need to remember the world will go on disappointing us. Sin is not going to go away. Still, the world does not need to be opposed with a sign of contradiction. The world needs what we offer as believers. The world needs to be engaged and accompanied and given the gift of patient dialogue. Pierre Teilhard offered this prayer. It is to your body, in this its fullest expression, that is, to the world, become through your power the glorious living crucible in which everything melts away in order to be born anew. It is to this that I dedicate myself. It is in this dedication, Lord Jesus, I desire to live. There is the perspective we need to keep. The world is not so bad. The city of God is not out of reach. It's here, within us and in each other. No matter what is our party or our other commitments, let's go into this new era beyond the 2020 election with a renewed determination to work a little harder and build the city of God together. That's it. Thank you very much.
I'll put some sound on the clap here, but I think the Zoom room is clapping with great vigor and passion. Steve, really a tour de force, my friend. Thank you very much for your preparation, your hard work, your reflection. You've given us a great gift. I remind our gathered crowd that we'll have this video available, and I think we'll even ask for the text, Steve, if you wouldn't mind. And you can share it with friends and consult it later on. It really is a beautiful talk and a very important talk, and thank you again. I'm going to get things kicked off here. I do have some questions coming into my chat, but almost working from one of your concluding points, Steve. And I think out loud. So polarization, right? It's clearly a de-evolutional retrograde expression of a baked-in anthropology of humans, right? And you can look at it several ways. You can think about Carl Schmitt, for example, in a theory of friends and enemies, and how that's implicitly polarization making, right? But then it refers back to this implacable power of tribalism, right? And because that's the case, theologically, it's the very reason for the incarnation of God and the gospel. And we just tend to forget that. Jesus, is the grace, or offers the grace, or invites us into this way of being that is a corrective for that baked-in anthropology. If you want to go Thomistic wise, it is the grace that corrects or builds on nature, or perfects, but that's a tough word. So I can't think of, the Gospels are teeming with these examples. You cited Pope Francis's and Sister Karen's reference to Pope Francis in Fratelli Tutti. The parable of the Good Samaritan is a snapshot, and it speaks to us because it's of its truth. We have the responsibility to our neighbor more. We have a responsibility to our wounded neighbor more, to our wounded enemy, not just this week, but next week. So, I think that you are naming this in our political moment. And I just wonder, especially for a country that prides itself on being a Christian nation, that how do we explain all these dissonances and these gaps between people who proclaim this great core mystery of Christianity, but yet don't see how they have it kind of wrong, right? How they misunderstand it. So please respond.
I take great spiritual comfort in the quarrel between Peter and Paul. If anybody really ought to have been able to escape the temptation to divide, it really ought to have been St. Peter and St. Paul. And yet there we were, not 20 years past the resurrection. And the church had become divided. And the church, of course, was divided before that already, too. I think I would respond to say, of course, you're right. The challenge is that the tribal instinct is reborn with each human being that enters the world, nature that needs the perfection of grace. And even in our own lives, we all have better moments and we all have worse moments. I think so obviously that's the nature of our problem. And the spiritual tradition and the gospel, these things are here to help us. They're here to be reminders. I think there would be a parallel talk that I would give with this that would be much more spiritual and focused on a kind of a spirituality of citizenship. And I may work on that at some point. But I think what I would say, just to try to keep this response as brief as I can, I think what I would say is that in this particular moment, it's important to call attention to the fact that we really need to attend to perfecting our nature because it's grown so dangerous. Because it's grown really dangerous. Not only because there's a pandemic that's on the threshold of 250,000 Americans and more around the globe, that's really only the result of the politicization of public health, really. the fact that it's gotten so far out of control. But the fact is that the world is devolving into ethno-nationalism. We're losing confidence in the political and social institutions that have kept and made peace, that weren't perfect, that need correction and improvement, but the direction we're going is not in the direction of improvement. And so it seems like this is a moment, if indeed we Catholics in the United States, being so numerous and this country being so powerful, if we indeed do enter a new moment next week, as I believe and hope that we will, then now's the time to really focus ourselves on what I need to be doing differently.
Thank you, Steve. I have some good questions coming in. I'll give you one more, then I'll turn to them. Now, I personally seek to be post-ideological in my approach to my faith, right? Or as a scholar and as a Catholic. That's not always easy to do because especially as Americans, we always tend to get tribal again. We look at ourselves in certain areas. So when it comes to, Catholics in America today, there's a question actually from last night, I'm looking at it right now, how to deal with pastors who use forming consciences, but don't refer to anything Pope Francis has written, for example, right? How are we to be honest? In fact, I think EWTN, which really has taken an ideological turn if you think about it. They have their voting guide has 0 quotes from Pope Francis.
They quote Benedict XVI.
Go ahead, Steve.
They got Pope Benedict XVI wrong. They quote Pope Benedict VI. They left out the X.
Oh my gosh. And even that, I think he's supposed to be called Father Benedict now, but let's not let that. And Father Benedict, I think, would be the first person to say, what is going on here? So anyway, there's just these, there's the Bishops' Conference, which has, we have issues with the magisterial church. There's tensions with all kinds of approaches to the faith and how to be a Catholic in the American context. So I don't know, how do you think about these divisions, as you navigate your, even your life, your thought?
Well, yeah, I've had to navigate that problem. I think I would say this, what I've tried to do, and I'll be honest enough to say, I think having experience as a classroom instructor is a great help. You and I have this advantage over most other people, but I think anybody can do it. I think the answer is to try to do the unexpected thing, right? The thing that's done in the parable of the Good Samaritan. My best advice about the homilies is take Father to lunch, buy him a dinner. Set him down in a low stakes environment and talk to him. Because when I see, I'll just name Father Altman up there in La Crosse, who's gotten so much attention with his YouTube homilies. I see a person in pain, really. And even if he doesn't know it, even if he doesn't feel it, I see a person who's been deprived of the spiritual richness of what the church is, of what we believe. My job's to try to fix that. Your job is to try to fix that. I think the only thing I can say, and it's not exclusive to Father. It's, the people next to you in the pews. It's the people you meet at work. It's hard. As you say, it's hard. But I think really it's necessary to meet people where they are and to ask them that question. What are you really saying? Is Roe really saying we love killing the unborn? Or is Roe really saying we value women? I find it hard to believe it's saying the first. Maybe there are a few people. But I feel sure almost everybody believes the second. I can talk about that. Now we can have real conversation. We can talk about the values we share in common and the world that we hope for. And maybe we're going to disagree about some stuff. But if we can diffuse the tension, lower the stakes, and learn to like each other a little bit, I think things improve.
Thank you, Steve. And thinking about Father Altman too, there's that patina, more than a patina of that muscular Christianity that appeals to some, but the Sturm und Drang of that of the videos is that aesthetic drives me crazy. Excuse me.
I don't think Beethoven would like it either.
I don't think so. Hey, here's a question from Cameron Shep. And Cameron says, as a young Catholic woman, I am acutely aware of the lack of female leadership in the upper echelons of the church. Do you think this lack of female leadership in the church affects modern Catholics comfortably, affects modern Catholics' comfortability with female leadership in our political system?
Oh, Yeah, I mean, I think sure it would have to. And think back on what you said a moment ago about that muscular Christianity. There's a lot of the old world that we haven't let go of yet. I don't think that's a newsflash for anybody. There's a lot, and I don't just mean the church. There's a lot of the old world that we haven't let go of yet. I never thought about that. About you're right. If I'm right that how we behave in the church and how we behave out in American politics and society, we should approach the same way, then you're certainly right. The lack of feminine leadership in the church must be a political problem too. I never thought of that, but that's really good. And I would say, two things. One, the leader in the church I'm glad to have quoted most often in the talk that I just gave was Sister Karen. And those of us who know that the leadership of women in the church, it's not permitted to be loud, but it's real. And in most cases, in fact, almost all cases, it's better. But it's not permitted to be loud and visible. That's the part that we've got to change. And I think Pope Francis, in his own way, is slowly beginning to change it, to open up leadership roles to women that hadn't been before. I often tell people the church is very old and it doesn't move very quickly. And that's both its greatest strength and its greatest weakness. I'd love to fix everything that's wrong with the church today, but very much like American politics, the hard thing is we all have to change together. We can't just wrench part of the community from where it doesn't want to be. That's the downside of all this communal stuff that I was talking about. We all have to do it together, and it means we have to prepare each other for the changes that are going to be beneficial that we need. We need to prepare one another, and then we need to do it all together, or else the change doesn't really happen. And that is both true in the church and in political life too.
There's a series of 3 questions just came in here. Let me just read them out loud, Steve. Okay, and you can pick them.
They're not anathemas, are they?
Sorry?
They're not anathemas, are they?
I don't think so, but I'm sure someone can correct us if they are, or pray for us. Okay, so how do you think the appointment of Justice Barrett has affected the desire of recognition of women as human persons within the Catholic Church? That's from Casey Barrett. And then Chaplain Donna Zerwester, I don't think I have your last name all there, Donna, forgive me, but she says, can you speak to the divisiveness of the, quote, power over approach of misogynistic patriarchy? And then I think then Donna adds this, she just piped in here. Do you think that minimizing, for example, the orthopraxis of pastoral theology in seminaries affects, quote, exclusivity of the hierarchy and ergo the non-inclusivity of laity? And I think she might even add women. You know what I mean? Things like that, Steve. Yeah.
Yeah, let me try to go backwards and I'll get to my Loyola student, Ms. Barrett, last. Let me try to take those last two kind of together as well as I can. I certainly, again, this would be kind of off topic. I'd have a lot to say about it. I work at a seminary. I certainly would say that there is a lot in the training of men for priesthood that is related to some of what we're talking about here. In part because, and it sort of goes to this power over thing too, I'm sort of continually struck, I mentioned it only as an aside about Bishop McElroy. He's the only member of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops with advanced degrees in politics. I understand, as well as Bishop McElroy does, and in a way that very few other Americans do, how complex it really is to try to make change happen. And the idea that bishops or priests of the Diocese of La Crosse should be offering a lot of public policy advice from the point of view of their MDiv or their DMin or an unrelated training. This idea that the sacrament of orders gives political wisdom or even gives political knowledge. It's a passenger on this idea, this larger patriarchal idea that you're talking about. And I think I would add too, it's not unrelated to the lost focus on the pastoral dimension of spiritual leadership, the overlooked dimension of pastoral dimension of spiritual leadership. I think obviously there are all kinds of seminaries and there are all kinds of places that do it, but oftentimes I think there's too much emphasis too that's put on the academic dimension of it. It's certainly true that men for the priesthood need theology and they need to have a good understanding of moral and ethical questions and that sort of stuff. But I do think probably a greater attention to pastoral care as part of the training, and I mean hands-on pastoral care, is something that's missing. I don't want to talk too much more about that. It's strictly off my topic, and I'm more speaking just as my opinion as a person in the pews than I am as a whatever I am as a political scientist. To go to Ms. Barrett's question, though, about Justice Barrett, no relation, I've been reliably informed. To go to Ms. Barrett's question about, what was that, about whether the confirmation of Justice Barrett has altered the way that we think about the roles that women can play?
She says has affected the desire of recognition of women as human persons within the Catholic Church.
I think that's been complicated, and I think we're still sort of sorting out who she is and what she means as a public personality, as a mother, and as the kind of mother that she is, of the kind of family that she has, and certainly as the kind of Catholic that she is, belonging to one of the new ecclesial movements as she does. We're still sorting out through the puzzle of who she is. And I do think, if I'm getting the flavor of Ms. Barrett's question correctly, I do think that raises some questions. It's certainly a pointed contrast with Justice Ginsburg. It certainly raises some questions about the public perception of women, the roles that women play in positions of authority. I really don't feel qualified, not because I'm a man, but because so little time has passed since we've really gotten to know her. I don't feel qualified to say much more about that, except to say that I think certainly her presence in our national life can change things depending on how public she wants to be about it. Supreme Court justices usually aren't, but things are changing.
Yeah, this is where I lament not being in the room together with all of our guests. We just would have so many things to read off each other and other voices to hear. But thanks for the response. I have several questions on the abortion issue from a variety of angles. And I want to just acknowledge Carol Turris, William Whalen, but there are many others. We have a lot of questions coming in. I penned this a bit because we had Bishop McElroy here a couple of years ago and spoke with him about these issues. And he is a political scientist from Stanford, right? Mm-hmm. No slouch. But really in the, kind of a scapegoat or a flashpoint of a certain kind of Catholic. And yet I think what you were saying in your talk is incredibly helpful. So he does help us navigate abortion with a kind of Christian realism brought by his training and by his pastoral side too. He doesn't deny it's a preeminent issue for a minute, but what he doesn't like, and he was in a conversation with Sebastian Gomes from America, he knows that the issue's been used dishonestly. It is not, it's dusted off every 4 years as an election issue. And so you rightly recall us to the facts of 12, so that really, I don't know why people can't realize that. So is there going to be a 13th, or do you think the Barrett nomination will change that? Maybe it was 12 and now it's 13. But how do you think about those abortion intrigues here in 2020?
Well, I think there's two things. One is the legal dimension of it. I think abortion is ready to come off the front burner. For a couple of reasons. It seems very clear that the court's most recent decision in June Medical this past summer is going to put a lot of the emphasis on state governments. The regulation of abortions is really going to be up to states. It's not going to mean much as a federal issue going forward. Now, that won't prevent people from fundraising on it or exploiting it. The issue's been used dishonestly before. Maybe it will be used dishonestly again. But the other thing about it I'd mention is, right now, about 40% of abortions aren't procedures. They are the result of taking mifepristone, the result of taking the abortion pill. And that doesn't change the moral question, but I do think it changes the contours of the issue socially and politically. It raises a different set of questions socially and politically, and frankly, ones that are much less susceptible to political manipulation, because now we're talking about a pharmaceutical that's regulated by an independent agency. So for a variety of reasons, I think abortion is set to come off the front burner in that sense. But the other thing I'd add really quickly is I certainly have detected there's been a new willingness this summer for those of us in the Catholic Church who agree that abortion is a preeminent priority, and for those of us in the Catholic Church who would like to see a more just and merciful politics. Those of us, though, who are impatient with the abuse of this issue for the last almost 50 years, the fruitless abuse of this issue for almost the last 50 years, I've detected a greater willingness to come out and say so. And I actually think that the inability of the US bishops to produce a new faithful citizenship document for this election was revealing of the fact that there's a substantial number of them who know we need to go in another direction too. I think that's a fruit of the Francis papacy, but it's also a fruit of there's only so long you can keep this charade going. And I feel that we're reaching the end of it.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Steve, for that. There's been a couple questions kind of along the line from last night, our talk last night, which was excellent, with Ken Woodward and Kathy Caveney and Matt Sitman from Commonweal. That was a great conversation, and this was brought up. But there were some Democrats on the chat saying, when will they be welcomed back, because they believe in the humanity of the life in the womb, for example, but they're not welcome, they feel, in the Democratic Party. So that's something to navigate as well. A quick thought on that?
Yeah, I think that's a real danger in this moment too. There's a considerable encouragement that Joe Biden can, plausibly maybe become the second Catholic president of the United States. But I worry more that the days of bipartisan Catholicism are coming to an end, that this could be the last hurrah for Catholic Democrats. And I don't say that because I identify with the Democrats. I say that because I think the bipartisanship is healthy. I hope very much that a Biden administration is aware of that. And I hope they're aware that there's a real opportunity in the world around us. I've been saying for months that hundreds of thousands of young people took to the streets this past summer because they believe in Catholic social teaching. They may not be Catholic, they may not identify as Catholic, they may not think of it as Catholic social teaching, but by God, that's what they did. And if a Catholic in public life in a visible high office can make that connection, I think there's possibly a great future. But I think we're in a perilous moment where it might not be made. There again, we have to pay some attention and do it.
Yeah, it's tough to forage an ecclesiology out of what you just mentioned there, which makes institutional ecclesiology and those who live in it a little bit, nervous. What's the church going to look like? But you're exactly right. And all the studies, from Cara you mentioned, and St. Mary's Press, the going, gone, are young people being kind of irreligious or not trained, not formed in religion, or that they're saying no because maybe big institutions have not treated them very well, for example, and the Catholic Church maybe being one of them in some way. So that really is something we're going to see the next 20 years and how we might navigate that. I'm going to leave this out. One more question from Sister Mary Joan Smith. And then, do you know Sister Mary Joan?
I don't. I'm just delighted to get a question from a sister.
Okay, yeah. And she said, well, you like this. She says, I love Stephen's comment about the need for more pastoral formation in our training of seminarians. Some Lutheran bishops insist that their seminarians must have at least one unit of clinical pastoral education and to be a certified chaplain. I totally agree that this would be a great formative influence on future priests as well, to learn to be more compassionate and a little more comfortable with those who are suffering. So it's a different kind of thing, but I'm glad that she asked it.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing it as, perhaps a mandated sabbatical prior to the fullness of orders to the ordination of bishop either. It wouldn't hurt to go work in a soup kitchen for 2 or 3 weeks before receiving the mitre and the ring. I would opine just as a private citizen. But if we are not a church at service, I don't know what we are.
Yeah.
We're the
Well,
Republican Party at prayer.
oh, yeah, good line. Francis, maybe tweet that one. Uh, hey, we'll do one more. This is from John Otto, and John Otto, there's an L. If I don't have her last name, John Otto, apologies. But here's a question, Steve. Is the sensus fidelium properly understood as simply a reflection of the magisterium, or is the sensus fidelium a process with its own dynamics and integrity that the magisterium needs to consider in the process of determining when it comes to teach and what it chooses to teach of the faith?
Yes. I really, that's, I think, the best answer. I'll elaborate a little. Because from my training in political theory, I'm not a theologian, really. From my training in political theory and from a long, broad reading and things around what we're talking about here, every aggregation of human beings is exactly what I said about politics. It's dynamic, it's living, it's breathing. The magisterium is not inert. It may be eternal, it may be undying, but it's not inert. We know doctrine has a growing end. And we know that the last word of creation has not been spoken by the Creator. We are in a process of learning who we are meant to be, each of us individually, but who we are meant to be together as a political society, as a church, as a parish, as this group of people. It's what we do when we gather together in spaces. It's the magic of what happens when human persons gather in community. There's a wonderful reflection in Fratelli Tutti. If I'm being honest, it's actually my favorite part. I want to write a little bit about it too. But Francis talks about historical consciousness, the fact that we are creatures of memory, and the fact that our consciousness of who we have been shapes who we are and who we believe that we might be. And that's true in my life individually, as it is in yours, but it's true in our politics. We are bounded by our tradition, except at the top where we grow. And while I believe the church teaches unerringly, I don't believe the church is the mind of God. We don't have perfection yet. And so, of course, the sensus fidelium is here to be a dialogue partner in taking us closer to the fullness of knowledge and grace and history that we will find when finally everything that rises converges.
Well, nicely, and a nice finish to kind of call on Teilhard there. Was that from your talk? Was that from Mass on the World?
That was the end of Mass on the World.
And then that's a wonderful piece. Viewers, we want to look at that one. It's a special prayer. Okay, Steve. Last thing, what are your pro tips on watching the election on Tuesday night? What are you looking for as a political scientist?
If Trump loses Florida, go to bed. It's over. And we should know that. We should know how Florida's going, because they are one of those states that's able to count their early votes and announce them on election night. I hate to be all Tim Russert about this, but Florida, somebody get me a whiteboard, and let's hope that's the only way that the thing resembles 2000. I'm not one of those who's I don't expect too much that Texas will flip or that Arizona will flip. I tend to think these things are inevitable and they're coming, but I don't have anything here except the same gut that I use to tell me that at this time of year, Chicago weather forecasters tell me there will be snow more from excitement than from data. I think there's some excitement for those states to flip, but I'm not too sure about it. The real truth is there's a plausible map to 419 electoral votes for Joe Biden. I don't think that's the way it's going to be, but I tend to discount the possibility of a lot of court challenges because you can reach a number of states with large enough margins that it becomes implausible. And the last thing I'll say about that is I think that Donald Trump does not have a lot of friends in the Republican Party, and once they swore in Justice Barrett, everybody got what they came for. I'll be rather surprised if he's not a lonely man in a large house if Tuesday night looks like it's going against him. I don't think there's going to be a lot of energy to contest the election on the Republican side. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think Ted Cruz sounds like he's ready for this to be over. So, I mean, that's where it is.
Yeah. Well, with that, Stephen P. Millies, thank you very much. Bravo. And thank you one and all for tuning in. Thank you, Megan and Kathleen and Catherine and Francis. And thanks everybody for your good attention. And we'll see you online. Good evening.
Thank you, Mike Murphy. Hail to you, Loyola.
Good night, everybody.